today is the second day of the ETMA International Conference on Hybrid, Blended and e-Learning. To begin with today's session, I would just like to recount the 2 years period of turbulence which we all had due to COVID-19. And this COVID-19, among many other things, has brought many revelations to us. And most important revelation which COVID-19 has brought to us is the advantage which we can take out from the technology to impart education. So in 2019, whatever we did in person, in 2020, we did that teaching through digital mode. So we could have the experiences of two ends of the spectrum. And we know the advantages and disadvantages of these two ends, the weaknesses and strengths. So all of us have come to the conclusion that neither this extreme nor that extreme, and it is only the blended learning which is the new norm, or which will lead us to the future. So this blended learning, this is one area. Until and unless people have ample research, we do not exactly know how to blend and how to actually go about imparting education. So for this, only those people who are into the field of research can help us in understanding exactly how to go about undertaking this blended learning to the universities or the schools or the educational institutions. So today we are having a session on technology-enabled learning and the community of inquiry, a holistic learning approach. So for the holistic learning approach, in this particular session, we have two eminent personalities who have worked thoroughly on this area. The key speaker is Dr. Nathaniel. Is Associate Professor at Athabasca University Distance Education Program, Alberta, Canada. And to chair this session, we have Dr. Sanjay Mishra. He's Educational Specialist, eLearning, Commonwealth of Learning, Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. So I welcome the eminent personalities, Dr. Ostashewski and Dr. Mishra. And along with them, I welcome all the participants to this session. Now I would briefly introduce the session chair so that we exactly know what is he and how he is contributing to the field of blended learning or open learning. He had done a lot, we all have seen, but let me formalize it. Dr. Sanjay Mishra is Educational Specialist, eLearning, Commonwealth of Learning, Vancouver, Canada. Previously, he had served COL as Director of the Commonwealth Educational Media Center for Asia, that is called CEMCA. And prior to joining COL, he was Program Specialist, ICT in Distance Education, Science and Culture at UNESCO, Paris. During his service in different capacities at Indira Gandhi National Open University, amongst many innovative activities and programs, he developed the OER-based 1-year postgraduate diploma in e-learning. As a staff developer and trainer, Dr. Mishra has received the ISTD-Vivekanand National Award for Excellence in Human Resource Development and Training in 2007, and has facilitated over 1,000 hours of training in distance education, information and communication technologies, educational multimedia, e-learning, and open educational resources in over 30 countries. So with a big round of applause to Dr. Mishra, I hand over the floor to Dr. Sanjay Mishra to further take over the session and conduct it. Dr. Mishra.
Good morning to everyone in India and namaskar. It's my pleasure to chair this session before that, some protocols. I'm really thankful to Professor Mukhopadhyay for giving me this opportunity to be with you today. I know there are many senior colleagues, distinguished participants today attending this session whom I know personally. Thank you very much for joining us on this second day of this very important international conference organized by Educational Technology Management Academy, AIU, and Gurugram Progressive Schools, with the support of many sponsors and your participation. I think we have a great conference, had a great conference yesterday sessions, and today to start with, we have Dr. Nathaniel Ostashewski, who has been a long-time collaborator for me, and I know him personally. Before I introduce him and some of our joint collaboration works, I would request every one of you to kindly mute your mic so that we have an undisturbed presentation from Dr. Nathaniel. The recording is in progress, so all our behaviors in this session will be recorded. So that's something very important for us to remember. And if you do not like to be seen, I would also recommend you to close your video so that you are not visible on screen. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Nathaniel, who is currently associate professor. Very soon he will be professor at Athabasca University. He has years of experience ranging from K-12 education to higher education. Especially, he is an expert in the field of open digital distance education and teaches courses related to online design and delivery at the university. He has experiences in several countries. Particularly, he has been involved in developing and researching massive open online courses from the very beginning of the term massive open online course. Since 2016, I am involved with Dr. Nathaniel in designing, developing, and offering the technology-enabled learning MOOC, which we call Introduction to Technology-Enabled Learning, which is offered jointly by Commonwealth of Learning and Athabasca Open University. Athabasca University, which is the online university or open university of Canada. Today, Dr. Nathaniel is going to talk about a holistic framework of technology-enabled learning that provides or increased access, provides more flexibility, and an overall holistic learning experience for the learners. And he will be focusing on the community of inquiry framework that was developed here in Canada, and he has been involved in that development of research and practice there. So we are grateful to Dr. Nathaniel for his consent to be with us today to share his experience and share some of the nuggets of from his overall experience in offering holistic learning using technology-enabled learning. But I would like to share, before I hand over the mic to, I request him to speak and make his presentation. One thing about Dr. Nathaniel, he has been an inspiring teacher. I have received several emails because we have offered 9 iterations of the Introduction to Technology Enabled Learning MOOCs, reaching over 25,000 learners. We have received number of emails and from participants appreciating his inspiring role in the TEL-MOOC. So I'm looking forward to inspiring ideas and nuggets during this presentation as well. With that brief introduction, Nathaniel, if I have missed anything, my apologies, but over to you for the presentation, and you might like to add few more things about yourself before you start the presentation. Thank you very much. And I look forward to listen to the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to make sure you can see my screen and you can hear my voice. Can you confirm that, Sanjay? Dr. Sanjay?
Yes. Yes.
Perfect. Yes. So on the screen, you should see technology-enabled learning and the community of inquiry, a holistic learning approach. The community of inquiry, Garrison, Anderson, and Archer. Terry Anderson was at Athabasca University, the second author, and I actually took his place. So that's why somewhat incumbent upon me to make sure it continues to evolve. Thank you very much, Sanjay. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. While I have not been to India yet, that is the next one of the next places that I was planning. The last place that Sanjay and I met was in PCF 9 in Edinburgh. And I met several people from India, and I'm hopeful that somewhere in the future I can come and work with somebody in India in terms of technology-enabled learning. And the reason why that's interesting to me is because of the TEL-MOOC, and I'll explain as we go along. What makes me unique as a Canadian? I grew up on a farm. I still live on a farm, and you might notice some of the photos there. I actually try to incorporate a lot of agricultural concepts and analogies when I talk about technology, because agriculture, like technology or like education, has lots of innovation and technology that is always progressing, either education or agriculture. For example, in agriculture, you can see the machine behind me there. It has a GPS tracker, so we press the button, it drives a straight line down the field. So you know, this kind of things. Oh, sorry, somebody's got a mic. So these kinds of things are where we find commonality. So technology-enabled learning, as Dr. Mishra mentioned, we did 9. Actually, number 10 is currently in week 4 of the 6 weeks that will allow them to work. So if you are still interested in joining and or finding out more about what I'm speaking about in many of the presentation slides today, feel free to come to TEL-MOOC. You still can join. You still can have access to the resources. And one thing that we're quite proud of, and this is what Dr. Sanjay had asked very at the beginning, every single thing in the technology-enabled learning MOOC is open, meaning all the resources, all the materials. So that's something that we really take to heart at Athabasca University. I completed my doctorate at Athabasca University about 10, 12, 14 years ago. And that's the Athabasca is the world's second oldest open university. Open UK was 52 years old, and we're 51 years old. Anyway, interesting, the same fellow started both of our universities. So on to a little bit of today. What am I going to talk about? Obviously, if we're going to talk about technology-enabled learning, what are we talking about with this technology? Well, really, we're talking specifically in education about equipment, expertise, and services. So it's not always the hardware. You know, it's not always the hardware that really is technology. Processes, the community of inquiry is a technology, right? That conducts, manages, and supports teaching and learning. So I would even argue that the community of inquiry is, in fact, a technology. It's a soft one, not a hard one. As per Dr. John Drawn, when he speaks about hard and soft technologies, it's a soft one, meaning that, you know, it's abstract, and it's a design blueprint for how we can design modern technology-enabled learning. The slides will be available, obviously, through the recording. So there is information that you can follow up on this. So when I was asked to do this presentation, the term holistic came up, and I spent some time over the last couple of weeks trying to identify what is it that makes really the community of inquiry holistic with regards to the technology-enabled learning, which sometimes I shorten to TEL. And this holistic learning approach is really about all the components of technology-enabled learning, teachers and their teaching environments that are available in the modern day. And whether or not you're in rural India, whether or not you're rural Canada, whether you're not in the cities in the United States or the cities in Australia, the variety of technologies, while they appear to be able to limit what you can do, I would argue they don't. They don't. What actually is limiting is teachers, educators, ideas on how to make use of whatever technology they have. So I'll be challenging you to think about that as we go on. As you're well aware, the technology or our pandemic has certainly done a lot to the way the world has changed education. And now, of course, with the pandemic, all of a sudden, technology-enabled learning became overnight important. Educators immediately after the pandemic closed this down. Sometimes it's difficult to see if you're on mute or you press a button, and that's okay. So educators, right after COVID started in Canada, around the world, I know in many places, we heard in many places that schools were shut down for an average of 73 days around the world. 73 days. Now that's almost half a year. For most anyway. So educators struggled right immediately to be able to figure out how can we deliver instruction, create opportunities to talk to our students, and then maintain contact. And the reason why educators struggled is because they're prepared and they were living in face-to-face environments primarily. Most of the students in the world are still taught face-to-face, right? So with that in mind, that became a challenge. But we learned some things. I remember hearing shortly after the pandemic had gotten going, a couple months into it, the teachers had lost their identity. And it struck me as odd because still they had the tools, but many of them didn't know what to do with the tools because they'd never had to go. Now, of course, not everybody had access to all the kinds of tools that we'd like to see. But some things we learned specifically over the last 18 months is that learners needed to engage with others. They liked engaging in spaces like Zoom. I liked engaging in spaces like Zoom because we were all locked down. Educators need to be able to do a couple specific things. I teach a course and designed a small course called Emergency Remote Teaching 101. And in there, I walk through teachers, what is the basic things you would need it to do? So I really think that actually is what teachers need to be able to do going forward. And of course, we've well known that the digital divide is still quite significant. That's around the world. Learners, as I was saying, I go through these, they really needed to be able to get together. Well, they couldn't do that. Or could they? Teachers, all of a sudden we're in empty classrooms. For me, I've been teaching online for 5 years and working in technology in the classroom for 20 some. And, so for me, moving to this technology, no big deal. For many of our staff at Athabasca University, that's how we've been doing work. But we actually did miss the in-person contact. But teachers went from having students there to all of a sudden being responsible for students that were not there. And email works, but email doesn't work for delivering education in a quality experience. It can provide some stuff, but it's not necessarily quality that's needed for long-term sustaining of education. And then again, as the World Bank reports and OECD recent reports out there that at least half the people that were in the education delivery business, teachers, educators, professors, tutors, felt that they were very well prepared and that they were trained in some manner. I'm not sure about that because I even have son-in-law, who's 7 years old. And, he was a phys ed teacher at the time in a high school, and he struggled. And so the concept of digital natives and they all know how to use all the tools, that's not quite true. Not quite true. They might know how to use them, but that's not using them for education. And as I mentioned, the digital divide has never been more noticeable around the world. 1.6 or 1.26 billion were affected by the closures, and that's 75%. In Canada, although our numbers are different, if I back up to the year 2000 or 2003 or 4 in Canada, our numbers on this digital divide were the same. We didn't have internet everywhere. Rural households. I was working with teachers that had very limited internet. It's not about the internet. Technology is not about the tool. Technology is about what educators can do with students and their access to whatever tools they have. So anyway, what started before and worked before the pandemic was great, but where are we at? So back to that educational technology. So technology enabled learning, part of the solution. Let's take a little look into why. Technology brings, there's much ado about technology making students more capable. Unfortunately, the research doesn't bear that out. It does motivate students, particularly when they come up to new technologies, in terms of physical ones per se, but technology doesn't per se make people or students smarter, not really, but it does provide them with access to experts, information, courses like MOOCs, and many kinds of new kinds of activities when we talk about digital. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a digital smartphone. It can be simply a phone that can use WhatsApp. That's one benefit of technology for education. The second is flexibility. And you've heard about personalized learning, anywhere, anytime. That's really what technology brings. And it's nowhere more evident than if you go to fully online learning, because there often very few live sessions occur, many in discussion forums, many in recordings, many in assignments that are within an LMS. But really, that's where the flexibility is really exaggerated, very, very evident. Anytime, anywhere, any place. Ubiquitous learning. It used to be mobile. Today, it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere, which is good. But that wasn't the solution for everybody in the world. Many countries took different solutions because they didn't have the Wi-Fi. Brazil, many countries or many states in Brazil, I remember talking to people, they didn't have Wi-Fi in their communities at all. So education just completely fell apart until they realized technologies that we've had before the internet, before computers, TV and radio. In the outback in Australia, the radio provided instruction to students for many, many, many years. There was no TV service, but they could get radio. And that was some of the original distance education technologies: radio, TV, CD-ROMs, right? So those technologies, they weren't as read-write as our new social media technologies, even WhatsApp, right? And of course, many that did have access struggled with, what do you put for students? Teachers hadn't had the experience. How do you design for this thing called remote emergency teaching? How do you design for online? What should I focus on? And it becomes very messy very quickly because they're used to people in front of them. Management of people is in front of them. Assessment of students is in front of them. Now, nobody's in front. So what do you have to focus on? And that's really what I hope the second half of my little presentation here will help you. Find out, if nothing else, where to go for some resources along that. And I go back to that holistic slide. We'll end at that point. So technology brings in that. What's the job of the teacher? If you're talking about in a classroom or in the education setting, and that would be, the job is student interaction and student engagement, right? So let's just take a look at those two. Student interaction, the students interact with content, the teacher, and of course other students, right? And in terms of student engagement, a big part of student engagement, regardless of the age, is motivation. Designing and delivering activities or active learning, or in learning that engages them, whatever it is, whether it's active or somewhat passive, like this presentation would be. We will get to an active part of the presentation. We love doing in the Telmuk a live session, 3 of them, and half of it I usually save for questions, because always people have many questions. And then of course, educators are responsible for assessment. One of the challenges with Zoom technology is, yes, sometimes it's difficult when people join in and they have an auto mic or audio join. So back to that student interaction and well, really, what is it? If you take a look at the things that teachers do, that teachers are in control of, the teacher picks the content. The teacher might discuss and figure out how to teach it with other teachers. But on the student side, the student interaction, students can interact with teacher, content, or other students. And that's an important point. When students are in a classroom, they can put up their hand or speak to the teacher. They can review the documents and materials as a book in the classroom. Or wherever they're located. And of course, they can turn and speak to their peers. And that's a big part of what was missing right after everybody went home and had to work at home to learn. So, but the teacher's responsible for this. And the teacher's responsible for this engagement element of education, which is, again, motivation, activities, and assessment. So, now, I know last night I attended the presentation, the keynote, and Dr. Tony Bates got many questions about face-to-face, hybrid, blended, fully online, and the continuum. Even Professor Marmar had mentioned about the continuum that we're talking about. And this is the challenge as we go forward. And that's where my model today that I'm going to talk about. What do we need to consider as educators when we're going forward? I truly do think the blended and the hybrid models are here to stay. For my own children, I have children and grandchildren. I have one son in grade 7 still, and others that are far finished school and university. I would like to see hybrid and blended. There are days when we have snow days in Canada. You can't go to school. Well, why shouldn't he be able to access his materials and do it? That's a hybrid approach. Interestingly, our school last year was on and off again for grade 7. He was in grade 6. Interestingly, the school division that he was in decided that every single teacher, even the online teachers in grade 7 and every grade, would teach the same curriculum every week. And the reason why is because if students had to stay home because of COVID, they just went to the online class, which was teaching the same content. So another even version of a hybrid or blended delivery concept within an institution, within a school division, with many grades. So, there's lots of things that we can come up with. But again, back to this question, which is the really challenging question. So, I'm used to teaching face-to-face. Now I've got this technology in front of me. What should I focus on? I've got, face-to-face, hybrid, blended. It came from distance ed. How do I make sense of this? It's no wonder that many educators that moved to emergency remote teaching were lost for a long time and probably still are wondering what should they take from the pandemic and bring forward into their future. And that really is a good question because not everything, that's for sure. There are things we need to consider. So how can we also make decisions about designing for simple technology-enabled learning, whether you have lots or a little bit of access to technology? Well, technology enabled learning was the first part of the solution to this holistic approach. The community of inquiry is the second part. And I'm telling you up front, I'm going to be going through these slides a little bit quickly because there's lots of information. Some people are familiar with community of inquiry, others are not. Basically, the community of inquiry speaks have three elements of the educational experience, and that is the cognitive element, the social element, and the teaching element. Much of the literature and research in the last specifically in 5 years, in many conferences, I've seen many institutions, universities, K-12, turning and looking to this model as a way to understand how to design and deliver technology-enabled learning, modern learning, where we have these. And again, the way that the model describes it is as a presence, a cognitive presence, social presence, and teaching presence. So let's take a quick look at a couple of them so you have some reference. The cognitive presence is basically the materials and the content that students are engaging with. And you can see, if you, as I'm speaking, you might want to look at that model or the diagram. You'll see in the dark blue on the diagram, on the model, engagement with content, and that's in the blue area. And this is the cycle from which the practical inquiry model, computer, although the community of inquiry came from computer and discussion forum-based education, it really has been shown to be very relevant regardless of what kind of education, whether it's face-to-face, anywhere on that continuum, face-to-face, fully online. This is a really good way to understand what to concern yourself with in modern education practice. So, cognitive presence. Next, social presence. In a classroom, any student can turn to another at some point, if not during the class. Often students are even put together in groups to do work. Why? Because educators know students learn from and with discussion with other students. In the fully online world, we do that in discussion forums. Now, 15 years ago, we didn't have Zoom. Today, we use Zoom as well, right? And you can do breakout rooms and what have you. But this social presence, well, what exactly is it? It's really about the empathetic, the emotional elements, trust, the human elements of the education situation, trust, discussions, relationships, shared experience. This is sort of what you would understand as the social element. And again, technology can support this, engagement with other participants. I know from the TELMOOC presentations and questions that we have many people using WhatsApp to communicate and have students work in groups because WhatsApp's an easy access technology and works in many places. I use WhatsApp infrequently, but I still use WhatsApp to reach people somewhere around the world. And then the last element, teaching presence or teacher presence. And again, this is the job of the teacher, like I was speaking about. Well, it is about setting, you'll notice in the green, it's about setting the climate. It's about regulating the learning. It's about controlling and presenting interaction and engagement, because teaching presence is really the role of the educator in the situation. In highly designed distance ed or e-learning courses, often the role of teaching presence isn't captured by one person. It's captured by a design team because the material is reused many times. If you go to TELMOOC, Dr. Sanjay mentioned we're in the 10th delivery. The content hasn't changed much. But in the 10 deliveries, we've been trying things like, should we release all the 5 weeks at one time, or should we one at a time? If you want social presence and engagement between students, 1 week at a time. Otherwise, people are scattered all over the course. For example, how can we increase completion? Well, believe it or not, offering interaction and engagement in terms of live sessions. We found that people that attend the live sessions are 4 or 5 times more likely to complete the course. Now, I can't tell you if they're very interested and they come to the session, or is it the session that encourages them to keep on going. And I like to think, as I appreciate Dr. Sanjay has said, if you go onto YouTube and search my name or TELMOOC, you'll come up with lots of videos. And these are my inspiration videos. And often I provide an analogy sitting in my farm. I can't show them now. They're 2, 3, 4 minutes. But if you do, have a chance to look at them. These are ways that myself as the educator present my social element, who I am to my students that I don't see. They look at the video at any time. So this is part of the teaching presence. In the pandemic, I quickly told educators, make a video, short video. You have a tool like this, make a video, post it online. Many of them did not do that. I said, this is the biggest and greatest thing you can do because, at the beginning of the pandemic, Wi-Fi in Canada couldn't get on it, especially Zoom or Adobe Connect, couldn't use it because everybody was online. And I said, make a video, put it up, let your students see you. They didn't. Do you know why? Because they're scared of what they'll look like. And it's odd because teachers are in a classroom and they're always looking at people and presenting. Yet to put themselves on a media piece, to record themselves, was just too foreign to them. Yet that was really simple for students to do. So, how does the community of inquiry, I'm getting close to the end here of my formal part of the presentation. What does that look like when we talk about our a blended scenario, or more than just fully online or face-to-face? Well, again, whether you're in a classroom, you still can use Flipgrid. You still can have students make and share video tutorials. You still can make a video for your students to view at the beginning of a module or a week or whatever kind of structure you have. You still can use Yammer to provide daily updates of what's going on, or use tools like Padlet, or you can also use none of these and just use WhatsApp to connect your students to each other so they can connect with the content and each other and discuss it while they have time. And that's speaking back to that flexibility. So, I teach a lot of graduate students, master's and doctoral students, and a couple master's courses that are focused on technology-enabled learning. And in the first couple of weeks, I tell my doctoral or master's students, I say, technology is not about making people smarter or more capable, perhaps more efficient. I can do more because I have it. But it's not about that. And research bears that out. It provides flexibility and access. And in most parts of the world, Dr. Tony Bates even mentioned this at length yesterday, OERs are the best example of what you can access. You can access information that's already organized for learning. The quickest thing there is, great, it doesn't quite fit my curriculum. So have your students modify it, or work with you to modify it in one term, and then you'll have it for the next term. Teachers have almost, in some sense, because technology seems to be a hard thing to use, teachers have forgotten to be creative, The things that I used to help teachers do in 2000, 2001, when the internet was so slow we couldn't put up pictures, are the same things teachers could be doing today that are very valuable. Connecting students in one classroom in one part of the world to another, and sharing information about the climate. What's the weather like there today? That was one of, a very powerful exchange between two science classes, one in Northern Canada and one in the Southern United States, where it was hot all winter. Sharing photos, sharing stories about the environment or even the cultures that make it up. In my experience of the Telmuk, the amount of information that I, as the teacher or one of the teachers, have learned about India, Bangladesh, Jamaica, many of the Commonwealth countries is far greater than I have time to go and experience otherwise. That's from my hearing the stories. Imagine if I was the learner and somebody was connecting me on purpose. That's the power. Access, flexibility. Please do remember this. These are the important parts of how do you figure this out. So, again, back to that question of, well, what is the right blend? And this question was brought up, and I expect some of you will ask things related to it today of me. What's the right blend? The right blend is what works in the environment you're in. If your students can't come to school because it's too far to walk, they might have to work on on some days and helping their parents, whatever it is, and they can attend. What kinds of things could you connect them to other students in their community, or send home with them, or connect on WhatsApp that they could have an engagement with students? Maybe that's where you'll use technology. Maybe like a free school in Bangladesh had sent a video. This was in very early for my Talmud deliveries 4 years ago. I was so thrilled. The teacher recorded a video, walked around the free school, and showed how they were using one simple technology to teach 30 students. And anybody could have done this in the pandemic. Of course, students would have to been spread out a little bit farther and have masks than the initial, but it was simple. It was teaching young students, probably grade 4 or 5. They were all sitting on the floor around a single computer with the speakers and a CD-ROM. And on the CD-ROM was a lesson about English and how to, they would ask you to say the word right. And then students would have to say it. Then they'd pause. The program would pause and student has to write it out. And all 30 students, one technology, not even connected to the internet. So again, what was that about? It's about creativity of teachers, creativity of educators. Sorry, I go back and forth between them both because while for 20 years I was a teacher, for 10 of those years, a K-12 teacher, I was charged with helping many teachers understand how to use a digital camera when digital cameras were brand new. What could they do with the internet if they could send an email with their students? The very, very simple things. And then I spent another 10 years after that, after I've done my doctorate and other stuff, working with professors, basically to help them do the same thing. The technologies are in their hands, but they don't know what to do with them. They don't know what to do with them. Simply being creative. So to bring my session or presentation near to a close, I really do send people back to the community of inquiry as a blueprint for modern education. Technology allows access and flexibility. Teachers are responsible for interaction and engagement, right? This kind of approach is what I would consider a holistic learning approach, because it really is all of those things. Now, often teachers that are in the face-to-face world never worried about access and flexibility. They don't have to. The pandemic made them have to, in some element, to either deliver the instruction or connect with students. So now that they've had that experience, what will they do with it? What will they do with it? I hope quite a bit, because educators well know, and the research points, again, Dr. Tony Bates mentioned this yesterday, the research points that blended is probably best. What amount? It depends. The topic, the teacher, the classroom, the technologies. But anytime students have an opportunity to take concepts and go home with them and think about them and maybe talk to somebody else about them that's in their class or another class, that's already taking an opportunity to engage a learner outside the classroom. Remember, students have all the time in the world. It's teachers who are always chasing time because they're responsible for 30 people. A student is often one. So I'll leave you with some resources that I don't want you to miss. I really, again, these will be, the slides will be on there, and hopefully I'll have a chance here to cut and paste these in here somewhere along the line. But Community of Inquiry, you can search for it. It's a website like this, much of the research and more examples. We are working on an interactive tool. I am. So you could go on and see what level of community of inquiry, teacher presence you're exhibiting, or cognitive presence is in your design, or social presence is in your practice. An online tool that'll also then support you and provide examples in video or text format. So that's what's coming in the next couple of years out of my work. I'm on research sabbatical and currently working on a digital tool to do that. There's also Athabasca University's an open university. Dr. Marty Cleveland-Innes, Teaching in Blended Learning Environments. You can download this book for free, or you can get a text copy. It's not that expensive, but download by chapters. AU Press. If you want some ideas of using the community of inquiry and blended learning. It's a short book, but very, very helpful. Dr. Marty has also worked on a guide to blended learning, and that's available on the Commonwealth of Learning website. The Commonwealth of Learning supported the development of a blended learning guidebook. What do these have? Ideas, so that teachers can be creative. And another one that's not to miss, because again, yesterday I heard about people's asking, what's the right blend? Again, Dr. Marty, the author of both of those, with also Dr. Dan Wilton, a graduate student of ours, has with the Commonwealth of Learning developed a blended learning practice MOOC. The next delivery, feel free to go to this, blpmooc.org, is in January. Please recommend it to students, or to your colleagues, or pass it anywhere you can in your social networks, because they're free offerings. One of the things different between the MOOCs that I design and Dr. Marty designs is we use an iMOOC design, I for inquiry, based on the community of inquiry. What do we do different in MOOCs that results in 25% of attendees getting a certificate, as compared to the 3 to 5% of the global MOOC attendees? 25%. What do we do different? We focus on connecting learners to each other. All my tutorial team, their job is literally to connect learners to each other. That's their job. Mine is to inspire and motivate. And that's, again, we've tweaked some things over the 10 deliveries. We've now had probably about 30 or 40 deliveries with the iMOOC design, and this concept of, can you bring quality to fully online, massive open online courses? Yeah, you can. Yes, you can. And the community of inquiry, I think, is watch for more and more research, because it's coming, that demonstrates that. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning, please visit my telmooc.ca. There is more information about the community of inquiry, about a couple other technology-enabled learning models, the TIM, the Technology Integration Matrix, University of Florida, and TPAC models that help you understand technology and teaching. It's open access. Come in, join. If you want to participate, go ahead. If you want just the resources, come and get them. They're about, much of this that I've spoken about today comes from all my discussions and presentations in the TEL. And again, if you want to see what I'm talking about in examples, and you can see some of them, I take videos everywhere on my farm. Why? Well, again, technology and education and agriculture are similar, but very few people live in an environment that is actually a farming one. So with that, I really do appreciate your attendance, and glad to take questions. I'll just put it back on my last slide there. And Dr. Sanjay, please grab the mic.
Thank you, Dr. Nathaniel. It's really covering a spectrum of ideas, particularly looking into the community of inquiry model and how both in online and face-to-face education, this model can improve quality of student engagement and learning outcomes. And I think you also mentioned about the challenges of digital natives, and the most important part of your presentation and is talking about technology at soft technology and hard technology, talking from John Tron's ideas and many others who talk about that, and community of inquiry as such as a technology that can be utilized. Before I ask one of our moderators to allow people to ask questions, couple of thoughts or questions that are coming to my mind, and I think you can allude to some of those, and then we'll go to the participant question. We have about 30 minutes for interaction, and then we'll have a closing wrap up. One of the things that always comes in mind is that within the community of inquiry framework, teaching presence is the key, because the teacher is designing things and providing the atmosphere or the direct instruction part that happens is through the social presence and the cognitive presence. Now, how the teacher balances these two aspects of putting the right amount of social presence and putting the right amount of cognitive presence, and therefore the teacher's role, her role as a teacher, is not overwhelmed and it's not overpowering, particularly in an online environment or a blended learning environment.
Great. Let's talk about a blended learning environment. And yes, so how does a teacher know how much effort to spend or how much time, if you would even say, to the social aspect or to the cognitive or to that element that the teacher needs to? Well, that's a great question. There is research already around, what happens if a teachers are very social, outgoing person and very good with connecting with students, but might not be, so good at marking assignments and making students, manage their homework and what have you. Well, in fact, the research shows that when one element of the model is in excess, it makes up for shortfalls in others. So I wouldn't ever say that there is, 30%. It's not that. The community of inquiry is simply a way so that educators know what their role is and what they should be focused on, providing opportunities for students to speak to each other, whatever the opportunity is. Maybe it's in a classroom. Maybe they're supposed to go home and email their partner that's working on a project, or WhatsApp for a couple days because they're going to present on the project as a part of an assessment. So there's again, this almost, and I speak to that in that remote teaching 101 course, because teachers, just like you and I, have different ways of interacting with the world. I'm a pretty open person. Surprisingly, when I was young, I was not. But being a teacher for 20 years, I became very comfortable with doing that. And so it's, I know what my strengths are. I can encourage people. I can get them to listen. I can, I've been a dance choreographer for 25 years, folk dance of many different kinds. And even tinkling when I was a kid, the Philippine tinkling competition. So, I mean, I sort of always was in the space of people. So that part, I always did well at, I guess. But again, the cognitive, in many cases, the cognitive is taken in account by the curriculum, by the textbooks, right? So that part is almost there already. Now, how do you engage the student? Just because I put a book in front of my son, he doesn't want to read it, right? So it's part of my managing his time, my encouraging him to read it, my sitting and reading beside him, my getting him to read it to me, my reading it to him, whatever kinds of things that an educator can do. And that's actually the exciting part of education, creativity on your own strengths. So I think it's part of the answer, I think, Dr. Mishra, is about what is your strengths. Perhaps you're really good, and perhaps you're really good at having students and collaborate and getting them working in groups. Well, good. Get them to do that more. Students learning and teaching, probably some of the best parts of it. I think the big part, when you take a look at instructionists, when I went to high school, there was a teacher at the front of the classroom speaking to me, and I just sat there and wrote notes, wrote assignments. That's what we probably, most of us, grew up with. Today, we well know that's not modern education. And community of inquiry says, or shows us, that a good segment of it has to be social interaction. Most teachers don't want their students to speak to each other. Be quiet, so you can hear me. That's actually incorrect, right? That's not correct. You should actually let them speak. Again, you can't let them take over. That's part of management. But, really from the time you and I probably went to school, sit in the rows, be quiet, take your notes, be quiet, right? Well, we know much better now. And that's at every grade. And Seymour Papert and several of his graduate students that followed him out of MIT wrote about all the best learning and the best pedagogy is in kindergarten, where there's learning centers that students choose to spend more time or less time themselves. And the educator, the kindergarten teacher, goes and helps them work through those. And that is really a challenge for somebody that's teaching biology 30 or chemistry, or that's a challenge. But that's the creativity of teaching.
Exactly. What following through on that, one of the things that your presentation also is about how community of inquiry model is being used in MOOCs, is in blended learning environment and elsewhere. And one of the important part of the community of inquiry model to provide a holistic approach is probably to do more with the blended learning. And we know from practice that the best teachers that we have come across in our education ever is that those teachers probably used a sort of blending in their teaching and learning approach without being calling it blended in that practice. What community of inquiry brings in is a deliberate design approach
Structure
into the teaching and learning process. Within that context, from your experience and from the researches that have been done, please tell us, for a teacher's skills, what are the key things the teachers should have in order to apply the community of inquiry model in their classroom, in particularly blended learning environment? Because in my personal view, blended is the way forward in all education practices anywhere in the world. So what are the key skills on COI, community of inquiry model, that the teachers should like to master?
Great question. And one that many educators want the answer for. So I just backed up a little bit here. I hope you can see the slide. Can you confirm you see the slide?
Not yet.
Not yet. Let me just see. It's on teaching presence.
No.
I got to share my screen again. Hang on. Sorry. Share. There we go. So back to this slide. So what is it that teachers do and that you should be concerned about? Well, teaching presence is about, as you just mentioned, Dr. Sanjay, design. So now I'm in blended. My job as an educator is to facilitate the discourse. So in a blended situation, my skill has to be tested or checked to what I'm capable of. Some people are very, very good at using WhatsApp. Many students have lots of different ways of connecting, but as an educator, you need to find what you're comfortable doing with. It doesn't work where somebody says you should make video, and that's not for you. It doesn't say you should use Twitter. I don't use Twitter. I tried a couple of times. It's not for me. But I use video and I use a lot of it. So that's for me. So how do I facilitate discourse? I use a platform like Twitter that uses video clips. It's called Flipgrid. It's free and open access. So my strength was I'm happy to video, and I used to be a videographer and for last 25, 30 years, videoing things in the community as well. So that was a strength of mine. And that's what I often recommend to teachers. Find what you're comfortable with in terms of a technology, or, and I don't mean, a device. I mean, a process of things you do. So mine is to present to video. Somebody's would be to use Twitter, and then connect your students to one or with one technology. Teachers often make the mistake of thinking that the more technologies, society in some senses promotes this idea that a whole bunch of technologies are going to make students a whole much better or a whole much more able. Not true. Many students the research talks about many students being overwhelmed. I know of a graduate student who took 2 courses and quit because too many technologies were being shown to her too quickly. She got just overwhelmed. An adult, 40-year-old adult, computer skills and everything, too much. So, when you think about the learner, be careful of too much. Find the skill that you're really good at. And like I said, perhaps it's about how you do direct instruction. perhaps it's about engaging students and having them do some of the instruction with you. But again, this is part of finding what are you as an educator capable of, and then what can you send students home with? What can they do in their spare time that's related to this concept? That's the blended part. It doesn't have to be big. I saw a great one on the news tonight about it would make an awesome classroom project. Very simple. Students, many of them, can take a photo. Take a photo of a pond or a shore or a grove of trees, and everybody brings a picture to school. Well, imagine how many pictures of trees you then have to share, or insects. Again, the teacher only has a little bit of time to show 1 or 2 photos of an insect, but all of a sudden you have 20, 30, 40 pictures of different insects. Imagine the conversation you can have just from send students home. The reason I brought this up is around the world, there's an initiative for people to take photos of shorelines everywhere around the world, started out of Australia. It came to Canada recently, and take pictures, and people keep taking pictures from the same spot and sharing them using a hashtag. And scientists are going to watch the photos as they evolve when we go through climate change and changes to those coastlines. And so think about that powerful use of technology, a simple one, taking a picture and sharing it. So perhaps you're excited about photos, perhaps you're excited about Twitter or whatever, WhatsApp. That's the thing to find, and then blend it into your experience.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Nathaniel and Dr. Rama. And would you like to take on the questions, ask what the participants are asking?
Yeah.
Or,
yeah, before the questions, I would say that there are a lot of compliments for the speakers. And yeah, the question, one of the questions says, yeah, it's
there's a long list.
yeah, it's
I think one of the most important question was already asked by Sanjay.
Yeah.
What are the teacher skill? And Nathaniel has given a beautiful answer, response to that. So Sanjay had already picked up one of the most critical questions asked in the whole list. My chat box is open. Carry on.
Dr. Rama, please pick up some questions and you can take up so that Dr. Nathaniel can respond.
Yeah, Pradipta has this question: how can we develop our classroom technology-enabled learning in remote areas? So Nathaniel has given a lot of examples, because Athabasca is somewhere not remote, I would say, but yet far. No. When I visited that, so remote areas as internet connectivity is the biggest challenge.
So a good question, because the pandemic showed that an hour away from where I live in a rural community, 3 hours from a big city, but there's Wi-Fi everywhere. Yet one community here that's a little way away is a First Nations community, and they live down in a valley. And so there's no Wi-Fi access. It just isn't, there isn't cell phone access in the valley where everybody lives. So pandemic hit. Their only place in the whole community that had any internet was the school, but people couldn't come in and out because the school was shut down. What did they do? They took internet routers, put them on the outside of the school. Students would come to the school on a day or a weekly basis, download their stuff, go back home and work from there. Then some students didn't have an iPad or a computer, so that the school loaned them out. I've heard numerous out of the pandemic examples of where people didn't have access to any technology, and what communities did was bring some technology connectivity for a short period of time to them. One of the most powerful projects I ever did, we sent a teacher with a laptop and a sat phone that was the size of another laptop into the jungle in Peru. And the school, this was in about 1999, And the internet was terrible. It was difficult to send an email, let alone photos. Digital cameras had just come out. You maybe get a black and white photo. And we were so desperate, everybody back in Canada, to see what they were doing on their blog every day. It turned out that what happened was it got so cloudy, they couldn't charge either the laptop nor the sat phone, so, but yet they kept taking and doing their blogs. And when they got back, everybody wanted to read every one, regardless of the fact that it was distant in time. It wasn't real time. So despite the fact of not having technology, that might be there or present at all time, opportunities to have access once a week, once a month, that still can be harnessed by educators. Again, I do know that there are other things. I can't remember. I don't think it was the Commonwealth of Learning that had mentioned about it. Some other organization where internet was downloaded into a box and basically a hard drive and brought into a community. That gets more difficult, but really, the internet doesn't have to be the worldwide internet. The internet can be Wi-Fi connectivity to a server in a school that has all the resources or many resources. So those are ways people can get around of being connected at all times.
Yeah, Raman, there are a few more questions. So
Dr. Madhu, actually my chat box, there is a problem. Can you put up the questions, please?
Okay, thanks, Nathaniel, for that answer. Now, Jyoti has asked, do you think blended learning is as flexible as we have physical or pure online learning? Because it needs more physical and online resources simultaneously.
Yes, it is flexible because the teacher's in control of that flexibility. So sometimes I think blended learning is confused where it's a pedagogy. No, the earliest blended learning I myself did would have been 1995 or 96. The internet was new. I had a computer and I was computer interested. I took I was doing my master's and I had taken a coding course, computer coding. And I'd actually learned to write HTML code. The first kind of interaction, blended thing that I did was I was teaching a science course, and there was lots of terminology every module. And there was 10 or 12 modules in the term. So every 2 weeks, I would have students take a test about terminology. Whatever it was, this biological term or this chemistry term. But the blending part that I did was I wrote code, I wrote HTML pages where students could go online, whether they were at home or in the school or in the library or wherever, because they didn't have access very much. And they could go and test and they could go and do a multiple choice quiz and see if they knew it yet. And I told them, I said, try it at home if you have internet access. Go to the library. Internet was very sporadic there. Not very many people even had access. And if you did, you had to dial it up as slow. But that was a blend. Why? What was blended? I blended the access to quizzes so they could pre-check it. And then the quiz in real life, when I gave it, was a copy of that page. So every time you printed out the exam, the questions were in a different order, but they got to practice. When did they practice? On their time. It wasn't in class time. That's blended. I've blended outside, used technology for them to access it. 1996, far before we had any kind of technology like we do now. Simple things like that are really, really powerful, or can be, especially if that's what the teacher provides. For my students, it was a big challenge to learn all the terminology quick enough. So that's what I did. And I've heard many other examples. Today, you can do that quite quickly for your students. So again, is it flexible? It's as flexible as a teacher can be creative. How can a teacher become more creative? Share with other teachers. Find out what other teachers are doing in your community. The biggest thing, when I did my master's, how could teachers learn from others? They actually learned from others that were experiencing it. Talk to other teachers. Hey, did this work out? Hey, what have you done for a solution? With all the connectivity, you have opportunity to ask and speak to many people now. Ask how their experience. How do you solve that? And much more powerful today tools that we as adults have access to do that sharing. So don't be scared to share. Don't be scared to ask. That's how we'll become more creative. At least I hope.
Thank you. Yeah, in your presentation, you made a very interesting point that technology is what educators can do. So there is one teacher, Hassan Maru from Bangladesh, if I am correct. He has written, please address the issue of self-pacing, which is a key principle of many blended learning programs. Question is big in the chat, but I think the gist of it is that he wants to know about the self-pacing part of it.
Yes. Part of that comes from an educator's approach to teaching. In my classrooms, and I often let students work ahead, do extra enrichment. In all the online courses that I ever design, or anybody I know designs in quality, is always providing extra opportunities for students to explore. So really self-pacing can be a motivator for students that are in face-to-face. If you've gotten this work done and you've completed it, you have an opportunity to do some exploring. You might use the internet tool. You might use the coding tool. You might use this other technology that we have, and technologies can be varied. So I don't want to suppose what they are. Or maybe you can help somebody else use the technology to extend something. So often the self-pacing really leaves an opportunity for students to share with other students. In my classroom, one of the last classes I taught often was multimedia and media. And I had, at any given time, I had 35 students doing 35 different modules, and they do 3 modules in a term. So this is a month and a half kind of time. All 30 of them were doing a different one. How did I possibly manage that? Any student that had ever done a module before, when they were done, they became an expert. So when somebody would come and ask me, well, can you help me with this module? And I'd be able to, unfortunately, I was always helping students, much like that kindergarten classroom. I'd say, no, I can't, I don't have time. But that student over there, he just finished it last month, go talk to him. And in some way, teachers feel that they own the experience of teaching. They don't. Students can also take that. And that's really, really powerful when it provides motivation. It provides confidence to learners. You go and help another learner because we know you've completed that task and you can help them. That's really a successful kind of thing. So self-pacing, leaves opportunity for much more expansive kind of work, exploratory work. And that's what I always used it for. Again, blended provides so much. And that's why Dr. Mishra and Dr. Marmar, Professor Marmar had mentioned, blended is where it's going to be. Without a doubt, our technology is here to stay. The blending of it depends on what an individual teacher's skills are and what they have access to and what they're teaching. When I taught English, different than science, than social studies, or the biology example, one of the earliest blendings I did is I connected to another teacher's many classrooms in a city 3 hours away, connected students, and they were on a simple discussion forum board, and they wrote a short story. They wrote a short story over a couple months. And then we brought them together physically and had a seminar all day, and they got to share their stories. One of the most powerful things is to do something with a stranger. Again, another student that's at the same place. Many educators haven't thought about collaborating outside of their room. That's blended. That's actually probably one of the most, out of my 20 years of experience of seeing powerful things in education with technology, the most powerful. I could give another talk on it all and in fact, I cut those slides out today because there's too many. Collaboration using technology is probably the most powerful of all. And collaboration doesn't need to be in the classroom. It could be to the classroom down the road, or to the other side of the province, or to the other side of the country, or to another country. And many teachers haven't even heard of this yet. So I think that, that's really one of my messages. This collaborative projects, collaborative activities that technology enables. Remember, access and flexibility. It enables that is some of the most powerful stuff I've ever seen in a classroom. I know some of my answers are long.
Yeah, no, you have covered a lot of questions. Actually, they are already on the chart, and in fact, some of your response has covered the other questions as well.
Great.
One of the very interesting question in the chat box, and also it is often asked by teachers when we talk about online learning or blended learning, and this is about how do you know that students are learning in a blended learning environment or an online learning environment, and particularly when you know that they're struggling with technology, how do you ensure that they're learning? This is a common question.
Well, so many teachers are not teaching technology. They're teaching content in an area. So first, educators, before they decide what they're going to blend, you really need to think about not only what physical technology you might have access to or your students have access to, but also what's your learning objectives. If your learning objective is to have students learn to write, learn to translate, learn to do a science experiment, those are going to be different blends. And so it's difficult to say, again, and I heard Dr. Tony Bates make the same comment last night, it depends on the content that you're teaching. If you're in social, like I gave you the example of my science one where, what was the assessment? It was really about practicing. That was what I had blended. But in other science times that I taught science in high school, I often let students select how they wanted to demonstrate they knew the content. In a science classroom, I let students create animations, create games, cardboard ones or paper ones, as well as digital games. This is back in 2003 and 2004, when these technologies were not common yet. The digital technologies weren't. I let them make a video. I let them interview or make a tutorial. Students need multiple ways to present how they've learned. And just like you and I've just spent time telling you, teachers need to find what their skill is. Well, you got to let students find what theirs is too. Yes, I know there are exams at the end of the year, but there are many parts of a time where students can share what they've learned with others. So after I had them make the games, what do you think I had them do next? I had them spend a day or a class sharing amongst each other. What more powerful way than to have 10 different ways to see the same content through another learner's eyes? There isn't probably a more powerful way to find content except that delivered by another learner going through it just like you are. The problem with educators is we already know the content. That's why we're teaching it. But that also comes with a bias, right? We can't see through the eyes. We don't know what's difficult to understand, but they do. Let them share that. So I often say, and I did not have time to speak about assessment. Another whole keynote speech of mine could be on assessment in the technology-enabled world, because we're asking teachers to use it, and there's lots of tools. We forget that assessment isn't just writing an exam with multiple choice questions. It can be and is much more. Maybe it's leading a WhatsApp discussion for a week. Maybe that's what it is for a student that's really connected to their phone. We have to be, again, creative.
Wonderful, Dr. Nathaniel. I want to add to the question of Dr. Mishra on behalf of parents, like what are the skills the parents should develop in their children to make them prepared for the technology-based learning or online learning? And are there any age-specific skills like for the normal learning at pre-primary level, we make them write and read or rote learning and all. So what
Super
are the
question.
specific
Super
skills?
question.
Yeah.
A super question. I struggle with it with my own son. I have children that are 31, 25, 28, all the way down, grandchildren, and I have a 12-year-old at home. In the time that I've been a teacher and seen what's happened in the last 25 years, 25 years ago, every student and in language arts classes, I would make them handwrite. Today, my son doesn't handwrite very well. And that bothers me because part of the process of writing is whether it's with a pencil or whether it's a computer. He doesn't take typing. And there's lots of argument where computers shouldn't be the subject. Fair enough, but they do need some tasks that you have to be able to interact with a computer in some way. So I think it's about making sure that students know the appropriate kind of communication using technology, and more importantly, what is appropriate things to communicate using technology, because the world is presenting many, many bad examples, and students need to know what is acceptable. We've lost the term netiquette. In the early days of the internet, we would spend time telling students, this is appropriate to do by email, this is not. They don't even know that anymore. Nobody tells them. It's just presumed everybody knows, but they don't. And I think that creates much of the problem. So depending on the age, when he was younger, I put him in front of a computer to make sure he knew how to use a mouse and a trackpad and go to the internet. Today in grade 6, 5, 6, 7, I've spent more time on, you need to learn how to type. You must learn to be able to write, because you don't always have that. You need to be able to calculate with and without a device, right? And as he gets older, it's going to be more about, can you create the right search terms to find what you want? Because I can assure you that in the next 10 years, the amount of information on the internet will multiply 1 million times. And the problem will be for us to find and then know if the answer is correct or legitimate, as opposed to not false. So students and information will become the most important skill. Can you assess and find valid, research-supported information? Because that's how much of the world needs to deal with it. So much like academics do, that's going to be a significant skill, even for junior and senior high.
Yes, Dr. Nathaniel, we are about to complete the session. We can keep on going. A lot of questions are there.
Happy for a few more for a while.
Those who are participating today, our apologies, we can't take all the questions, but before we sum up, give a quick sum up, I have a very important question. One of our professor from India has asked a question related to TELMOOC, which you probably can tell quickly 2-3 points that you can talk about. Now, the success rate, you talked about 25% on TELMOOC. In fact, at one instance, it was about 35% in one.
That's right.
Just give 2 or 3 points. What makes TELMOOC different to be successful? And this will be the last question before I wrap up the session.
What makes it different than all other MOOCs? And I've been designing MOOCs from when they came out. I worked with George Siemens shortly after he designed the first one, and some of mine were made in 2009. So I've been studying that part because it's a challenge in MOOCs, this completion rate. It's always been talked about. What makes the difference? Connections. So the content is there in all the MOOCs. The presenter or the content expert is on video often, and there might be some interactives. But if you go back to the community of inquiry, what isn't in that? So the teachers in the teaching presence on the videos, the contents in the videos and the material, OER or otherwise, what's not there? Social aspect. So what we focus on in the TELMOOC is connecting learners. That's the discourse, the discussion. Why? Because information of any kind, specifically for learners in teaching practice or in any kind of professional practice, is useless without the context. And again, I think it was Dr. Tony Bates yesterday or Professor Marmar had mentioned the context. So what do I mean? What do we mean by context? Well, what's your specific classroom? What's your specific technologies? What's your specific learning objectives? That context is different in every single class situation. So where do teachers, and I already gave the answer to this, where can you find out about what to do in your context? Find other teachers in your context and talk to them. What do we do in Telmuk? We try to make as many of those people connect to each other, connect to the questions they need answered, because they can read all the stuff. You can find all the models. You can hear all the presentations. But to make it work for you, you have to be able to ask your question. So we strive to have other learners, other participants become the content of the course. That's what we mean by connecting learners. I do not want to steal the opportunity for any other person to give the answer, because I sort of say that in extreme, to steal it. I want to give every opportunity and make it opportunities. We encourage in technology-enabled learning MOOC for an individual participant to come and make your own discussion forum. And then we will find people and send them to your discussion forum to help you answer your question. That's what's different. We put the power in the participants.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Nathaniel, for those and a lot of practices. We have reports available that can be looked at. At this time, I would like to thank everyone and my deep apologies for not being able to take the questions, a lot of questions, but most of the questions were also related to lack of technology for students. And that is a perennial problem. And equitable access to technology is important. We just don't have to adopt something that it is everybody is talking about. If you want to teach, we can teach according to technological needs that are available. Dr. Nathaniel, you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, many educators come and ask us in the Telmuk, and that is every single time it's a hot topic everybody wants an answer to. And unfortunately, educators can't be responsible for providing Wi-Fi, providing laptops. That's not our job. We can't do that. You have to work with what you have. And that's why I often give so many simplified, in Canada, they'd be examples from the past, and try to find examples from other places in the world, rural areas, because you don't have to have a big technology. It's more about the creative technology of the educator with whatever they've got.
Yeah, thank you. And that's the kind of issue technology I deliberately didn't took those questions to be talked about, because as educators we need to see how we can teach our students better according to the available technologies. There are a couple of questions related to how can I motivate learners on the blended online learning environment. I'm just sending a link on the chat box that might be useful to everyone. It's a book that you can actually download. It's a free book that will give you a lot of ideas about how you can make your blended online learning useful. There are a lot of questions, a lot of ideas that has come out, and one of the important aspects of making blended hybrid online learning real is our engagement, our deliberate engagement about making learning happen with the available technologies, what we can do with our students with technologies, not just online technologies, but with many other forms of technology that Dr. Nathaniel talked about. Technology as in general, as a kind of a holistic approach to technology, taking with the soft technologies and hard technologies. So don't forget about the soft technologies that you can still use. Even a test book is a technology for that purpose. So I take this opportunity again to thank Professor Mukhopadhyay and the organizing team of AIU, ETMA, and Gurugram Progressive Schools. And thank you everyone for your kind participation and active engagement in this session. Thank you very much, Dr. Nathaniel. It has been a pleasure to host you on this session. Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. I really appreciate that. And I look forward to seeing people. Again, please come to the Telmuk. There's lots of opportunities to ask your question. All right. Thank you very much.
Both of you, before Dr. Rama comes in, Professor Mukhopadhyay has to have his words.
Well, I have 3 words. Firstly, Sanjay made a beautiful statement called soft technology. One of Nathaniel's students sitting here in this group, when he finished Telmuk, he's a village primary school teacher. He has nothing to do with any promotion. This boy went on to take a course on animation from IIT Bombay, another course in IGNOU. Recently, he is doing a course in IGNOU, but he accessed Coursera course on nature and nurture. I said, why did you spend so much? He said, no, sir, I only took the course. Now, the question is, and then he said, I don't know how Nathaniel sir is able to connect to so many people at the same time. And his biggest gain was, he was to people in Africa, in other countries, and he was a teacher. This is my first point. Second point is, technology, more than technology, we need mind. I went to my village area and I was surprised to see they are singing national anthem abstract. I said, who taught you? I don't know, but Sanjay will brief. They said, sir, Lata Mangeshkar taught us. Lata Mangeshkar is called the melody queen of India. I said, how? The teacher used the phone and they asked to learn the song from Lata Mangeshkar directly. Now the whole question is, similarly, when this whole thing is closed down and people are crying about the crisis, the village teachers who have enthusiasm, they have been actually challenging these problems. And the schools have been running. They don't open the schools, but education has not. Similarly, another teacher, what he did was, he told, many of them have asked about, and Sanjay has given a beautiful answer, that many are not interested. So one village school teacher said, would you like to make a video on what you are learning? He said, yes, sir. He said, all right, tomorrow you come ready with this topic. Next day, he spoke and the video was made. Now the question is, it is the innovativeness of the teacher and no technology given by anybody else. It was teacher's own phone, teacher's own technology taken out of the pocket. I think problem is not technology, problem is our imagination. For example, why Nathaniel is Nathaniel or Sanjay is Sanjay, not because they have got a lot of money and a lot of they have the enthusiasm to explore unknown areas. I mean, Nathaniel would have, enjoyed a life, but they are continually exploring. They have done so much, but still they are not satisfied. I think teachers, many of them, I've seen all the chats, they are looking to buy answer from somebody else. Let me tell you, neither Sanjay nor Nathaniel, I know Sanjay at least for a very long period, they are not a salesperson. They don't have solution to sell. They can only inspire people to construct solution, create solution, given the situation. I think this was an excellent presentation. And since yesterday, Nathaniel was there during Tony Bates session and Asha Anwar session. And I don't know whether he was there in the afternoon. It has been a brilliant session, but I must specially congratulate Nathaniel and Sanjay, maybe because both of them are very handsome. There are 433s the score today when yesterday's score was 333. I don't know whether it's because of handsomeness or handsome presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So a right blend is what works for the environment. I think that is what is the takeaway. So we all, the community of educators, should evolve ourselves with experience and training to come to the level to understand or assess the need of the environment. And that is what Professor Mukhopadhyay also emphasized. So I thank one and all, particularly Dr. Nathaniel for such a wonderful presentation. And I also thank Dr. Sanjay Mishra, not only to chair the session, but making it interactive and interesting. And I thank Dr. Madhu Parhar for intervening and helping us out with the questions in the chat box. And I thank the rapporteurs of the session, Dr. Tausif Biswas and Ms. Banashri Mandal. And I thank all the participants all 433 participants who have come and inspired us to continue this program. And most importantly, I want to thank Professor Mukhopadhyay, not only to conceive such a program, which is need of the hour, and to realize it, this 3-day conference on hybrid, blended and e-learning, IGNOU 2021. And I wish that we'll have a series of such conferences in time to come. And I thank you so much, sir. Thank you one and all. Thank you, participants. With this, we shall conclude this session. Thank you.